האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dober Vietcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parsha's Ki Tisa. We're going to do Os Hey, section number 5. Before we get into the Zera Shimshon, let's take a look at a couple of psukim from the Parsha that have to do with the mitzvah of keeping Shabbos. This is Perek Lamed Aleph, psukim Yud Beis and Yud Gimel. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor, and Hashem said to Moshe, saying, V'atot daber el bnei Yisrael lemor, and you should speak to bnei Yisrael, saying, Ach es shabsosai tishmoru, only my Shabbases you should keep, ki oshi beini uveinechem, because it is a sign between me and between you, lidoro sechem, for your generations, lo da'as ki ani Hashem mikadishchem, to know that I am Hashem who sanctifies you. Those are the two psukim, and you'll see right now, we'll see how the Zera Shimshon gets right into those two psukim to start this section. Again, Parshas Ki Tisa, Os Hey, section 5. Medrash Yalkut. Zera Shimshon starts with a quote from the Medrash Yalkut Shimoni. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor. The Yalkut Shimoni starts with the two psukim we just read. Lo al yedei malach velo al yedei shaliach. Hashem told Moshe to give Bnei Yisrael, talk to Bnei Yisrael about the mitzvah of keeping Shabbos, and he chose not to do it through a malach and not to do it through any kind of divine messenger, but rather he told Moshe to convey this mitzvah of Shabbos to Bnei Yisrael. Ach es shabsosai tishmoru. The Yalkut Shimoni continues now with the next pasuk of the two psukim we read. Lama ne'amar, why was this pasuk stated, meaning why did Hashem have to tell Bnei Yisrael to keep Shabbos? We already have, this is Parshas Ki Tisa, but we already have the mitzvah of Shabbos back as part of the Aseres HaDibros and Parshas Yisro. So that we're going to see how that's what that means right now. Lefisha hu omer, because it says lo saseh chol malacha, because the Torah already said don't do malacha on Shabbos. Ein li ela devarim shehem mishum malacha. I only know that on Shabbos I shouldn't do things that are considered malacha. They're considered work. Malacha here is being used as a technical term referring specifically to the 39 prohibited categories of malacha, of work, that the Torah forbids a person to do on Shabbos. So I would, if the pasuk in the Aseres HaDibros only tells me don't do malacha, so I would only know I can't do those anything connected to those 39 categories of prohibited malacha. Devarim shehem mishum shvus minayon, things that are only forbidden because of the rabbinic decrees called Shavuos, are in the category of Shavuos, of resting, minayon. How would I know they are forbidden to do on Shabbos? Talmud Lomar, so the Torah comes to teach us with this new pasuk, Ach es shabsosai tishmoru, only keep my Shabboses, that you're not allowed, that you're prohibited from doing the rabbinic activities that are the things forbidden by the Rabbanon on Shabbos to protect Shabbos. Also, you're also forbidden to do those things. Ad kan Lashono, till here is a quote from the Yalkut Shimoni. So let's pause for a moment to explain the term Shavuos. Shavuos, of course, just by looking at the word or hearing the word Shavuos, we see that it's connected to Shabbos. It's the same basic letters, Shin, Vez, and Suf. Of course, there's a Vav in there as well, but a Shavuos, as we translated a moment ago, it means things you shouldn't do on Shabbos, but that are rabbinically prohibited. For example, the Mishnah in Maseches Beitza gives a few examples of this. One of them, a famous one, is we do not, the Chachamim, Chazal, made a takana, made a decree that we should not climb a tree on Shabbos, even though climbing a tree does not violate one of the 39 prohibited malachos. Nonetheless, the Rabbanan said we shouldn't do it because if we climb a tree, it might lead us to break off a branch or leaves or things like that, which it is prohibited to do min haTorah, from the Torah. So the Chachamim said, don't climb a tree, even though the Torah would allow you to do that, because it could lead you to do things that the Torah forbade you to do, such as breaking off branches and leaves. Another example is don't swim. Don't go swimming on Shabbos, because if you swim, the Rabbanan said you might create some type, you might build or form some type of flotation device, a raft, or something else that can help hold you up. And making that device would be forbidden on Shabbos. And that's another example. And there are many more examples of shvus, things forbidden rabbinically on Shabbos, because they might lead to violating Torah laws on Shabbos. So this piece, this quote, this excerpt from the Yalkut Shimoni is saying that the reason here in our Parsha of Ki Tisa, the Torah repeated a pasuk about Aches Shabsosai Tishmoru, only keep my Shabboses, was to tell us you're not just prohibited to do the malachos, the 39 prohibited acts of labor that the Torah forbids on Shabbos. You're also forbidden to do things that are based on rabbinic enactments called shvus. You're also forbidden to do those things on Shabbos. Let's go to the next paragraph. Tzarech Iyon. This requires analysis. Heicha remizi hai de lo al yedei malach v'lo al yedei shliach bakra. How is it alluded to in the pasuk that Hashem was specifically had in mind to say, Moshe, I'm only telling you to talk to Bnei Yisrael about not violating Shabbos, but I'm not sending it through a malach or through a shliach in these psukim, in the two psukim we read before we started this piece. How do you see that in those psukim? Many times in the Torah, it's written, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor. Hashem said to Moshe, saying, V'lo darshinon hachi. And Chazal don't make a drasha that says, oh, Hashem only wanted to speak and can have Moshe convey the mitzvah to the Jewish people. He didn't want to use a malach or a shliach, some kind of other divine agent. We don't generally say that. And yet, the Torah, how many hundreds of times does the Torah say? And Hashem spoke to Moshe to tell Bnei Yisrael to either do something or refrain from doing something. It's many, many times, but we don't see that Chazal on every one of those psukim says, oh, you see, Hashem's telling Moshe. That means Hashem did not want to tell a malach or some other divine agent to convey the mitzvah to us. Hashem only wanted to have Moshe convey it to us. We don't generally make that, we don't generally draw that inference, but here we do. So the Zera Shimshon's asking, where did the Yalkut Shimoni see in the pasuk any indication that we should make that inference, that we should make that drasha? That's question one. Ve'od, in another question, my shna di b'mitzvah zo davka, what is different about this particular mitzvah, hutzrach lomar, that it was necessary to say, lo al yedei malach ve'lo al yedei shaliach, that Hashem chose to convey it through Moshe and not through a malach or a shaliach, yoser mishar mitzvot shebat Torah, more than other mitzvos in the Torah. So the second question, which of course is closely related to the first question, is once we can figure out with our answering our first question as to how the Medrash Yalkut Shimoni saw in the two psukim we read that there was some indication that Hashem was specifically saying, I only want to give this mitzvah to Moshe to transmit to the Jewish people. I don't want to give it to a malach or a shliach. Once we figure that out, then the next question becomes why? Why did Hashem dafka specifically only want to give this mitzvah through Moshe and make that point, as opposed to perhaps other mitzvos that Hashem didn't feel it necessary to make the point that he was giving the mitzvah through Moshe and not through a shliach or a malach? That's the second question. Next paragraph. V'yesh lomar, we can say, the Torah could have said, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor daber el b'nei Yisrael. And Hashem said to Moshe, saying, speak to b'nei Yisrael. That's what the pasuk could have said. Kumo b'shar pamim, like it says in other places. Umidekosa ve'ata daber, from the fact that the Torah added in the words, and you should speak. So the extra word there is ve'ata, and you. Demilas ve'ata miyus teresi. The word and you is extra. It was not necessary for Hashem to say, and you should convey and speak the mitzvah that I'm about to tell you. You should give that over to Bnei Yisrael, because Hashem was talking to Moshe, so he didn't have to say ve'ata and you. So why did he say and you? Darshu, that's why they interpreted it sheba lirmos ata dafka, that Hashem was indicating, Moshe, I'm giving you this mitzvah specifically. Sha'ata ben adam, you are a person, a human being. V'lo al yedei malach, and I'm not giving this mitzvah through a malach, v'lo al yedei shaliach shel mala, and not through some other supernal messenger. I'm not doing that. I'm only giving it to you, Moshe. Kidi amrinan, in a similar way to what we say in the Haggadah, ve'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim. Hashem says, I passed through the land of Mitzrayim, and the Haggadah brings down the drasha, ani v'lo malach v'lo shliach. I, Hashem, and not an angel and not a messenger. I, Hashem, am coming to slay the firstborn. So the Zera Shimshon has answered his first question, which was how did the Medrash Yalkut Shimoni know that Hashem was making a specific point to say, Moshe, I'm only giving this mitzvah to you and not to a malach? And the answer is because Hashem used the words ve'ata daber, Moshe, and you should speak to Bnei Yisrael, which was not at all necessary to say because Moshe was already speaking. Was already speaking to Moshe and telling him, give this mitzvah to Bnei Yisrael. He didn't have to say, and you should give this mitzvah to Bnei Yisrael. So that's the answer. Because it says in you, it means Hashem was, so to speak, going out of his way to emphasize, it's you, Moshe, that I'm giving it to. I'm not giving this mitzvah to a malach or a shliach to give to Bnei Yisrael. I'm giving it to you, Moshe. That's the answer to question one. V'hutzrach dafka b'mitzvah zo. Next paragraph. And this was necessary specifically regarding this mitzvah, lahazhir v'lo al yedei malach, to make it known or to caution, so to speak, that Hashem was saying, I don't want anyone to think that gave this mitzvah through a malach. I gave this mitzvah specifically to Moshe Rabbeinu and not through a malach. Why? Lefi shekavonas hakosuvhi, because the intent of the pasuk is lehazhir es Yisrael shelo yechalalu hashabbos, that to warn Bnei Yisrael that they should not violate Shabbos, af b'dvarim, even with things shehem mishum shvus, which are forbidden because of shvus. We explained previously, shvus is a technical term that refers to prohibitions, rabbinic prohibitions on Shabbos that are made, that the Chachamim instituted to prevent us, in an effort to prevent us from doing things that might lead us to violate the Torah laws of Shabbos. So that was the specific intent of this pasuk, kidimashma mimilas ach, as it is implied from the word ach, which means only. Ve'al yedei malach efshar lahavin drasha zo. And if Hashem had given this mitzvah to a malach to convey to Bnei Yisrael, it would be impossible to learn out that rabbinic enactments are forbidden on Shabbos. Shaharei, because, going to the top of the next column, Isur Hashvus, the prohibitions, the rabbinic prohibitions on Shabbos, hu tosefes goder usiyag, it is an additional fence and parameter shetiknu Chazal, that Chazal established, kedei lasos mishmeres lemishmarti, in order to make a, so to speak, a guardrail or a guarding lemishmarti to the things I think should be guarded, meaning Hashem wants certain mitzvos to be guarded, to be watched carefully. One of those is Shabbos, where that language is used. And the Chachamim made things which were a mishmeres, a guarding to Shabbos, which Hashem wanted to be guarded. Shabbos, in order that people shouldn't come to violate the Torah laws of Shabbos. And this idea that the Chachamim should make these enactments to protect people from violating the Torah laws of Shabbos, Michlal HaTorah, it is included in the Torah. As we say in the second parak of Maseches Eruvin, the Gemara over there quotes, as you'll see, a pasuk from Shir Hashirim, Chadoshim gam yishanim, new things as well as old things, Dodi, my beloved, Safanti loch, I have hidden for you. So the Gemara in Eruvin says, what does it mean? What is the pasuk referring to when it says that new and old things I have hidden away for you? Halolu divrei Torah. The old things refer to the words of the Torah. V'halolu divrei sofrim. And the new things, the expression the new things refer to the divrei sofrim, the words of the Chachamim. So the Gemara in Eruvin teaches us that we are not only forbidden to violate Torah law, but we're also enjoined to follow the words of the Chachamim, and that is on a Torah level. V'yoser mehema, this is a phrase from a pasuk in Koheles, and it's even more than these, which the Gemara over there in Eruvin says. That means that sometimes rabbinic laws, we're told to be even more careful. V'yoser mehema, we have to guard against violating a rabbinic law in certain situations, even more than a Torah law, the Ayin Sham, and see over there. So the Zera Shimshon now has given us what we know from many other pieces to be our first building block in answering his second question. And the first building block is to teach us that the pasuk in our Parsha about Achesh Absosai Tishmoru could not be given through a malach. We don't know the reason yet, but it has something to do with the fact that the pasuk was intended by Hashem to tell us that from the Torah level, we must be careful to follow the enactments of the Chachamim when they make rules about things not to do in order to help prevent us from violating Torah law on Shabbos. Again, those are called, each one of those enactments is called a shvus. As we continue, we'll see why a malach could not have successfully brought that, taught that idea. But we're not there yet. Next paragraph. Even though the Torah specifically says that you're not allowed to add to the Torah, you can't add a mitzvah to the Torah, in which case, how could the Chachamim add prohibitions on Shabbos? We just said a few moments ago that the Chachamim made a gezerah, a takana, I should say, that they instituted that a person, for example, shouldn't climb a tree on Shabbos, is prohibited from climbing a tree on Shabbos, even though that's totally permissible according to regular Torah law. They added, seemingly, apparently, a new prohibition on Shabbos. And how can they add to a prohibition of Shabbos? And how can we say it has the status of a Torah prohibition when we know that we're not allowed to add any mitzvahs to the Torah? Al korchach tzarech lomar, so you are compelled to say, shema shene'esra lanu hahosafa, that the fact that we are forbidden from making additions to the Torah, eina ela be'ikar hamitzvah, that only applies to the core of the mitzvah itself. Kigon, for example, Hamesh Parshios Shel Tefillin. For example, adding a fifth Parsha, a fifth section of the Torah, to your tefillin. We'll talk about that in a moment. Chamisha minim belulav, are having a fifth species in addition to the four species which are part of the mitzvah of lulav. v'chadome, and similar things. So the Zera Shimshon says we have certain mitzvos where the Torah delineates how the mitzvah is to be performed. And that's called the core of the mitzvah. And if we try to add to that, to those parameters, then we're violating what the Torah said, the injunction against adding to the mitzvah. So let's just quickly describe these two examples. When a person, a very skilled person, puts together a pair of tefillin, and when we wear the pair of tefillin, inside the tefillin are either 4 separate scrolls of 4 specific sections from the Torah, or in the case of the Shel Yad tefillin, it's one long scroll that has the same 4 specific sections from the Torah. If a person comes along and says, well, if everybody else is wearing tefillin that contain 4 sections of the Torah, I'm going to do one better. I'm going to wear tefillin with an additional section from the Torah. I'll have 5 sections from the Torah in my tefillin. That sounds like, we could see how a person might think that's a really wonderful thing to do. But the Gemara says instead of doing a good thing, they're actually violating the Torah law of don't add to the mitzvos, because they're adding to the core of the mitzvah. They're trying to add and change the core of the mitzvah. And same thing with lulav. We know the Torah specifically talks about the 4 minim, the 4 types of things which we're supposed to use, the lulav, the esrog, the hadassim, and the arabos. If a person decides, gosh, that's a beautiful way to do the mitzvah, but I'm going to add a lovely twig from an orange tree with perhaps an orange hanging from it, that might be aesthetically pleasing, but that would be, again, violating the Torah prohibition against adding to the mitzvah, because the person is changing the core of the mitzvah. Back to the text, aval hadivorim shehem chutz me'ikar mitzvah, but things which are not part of the core of the mitzvah, they're external, they're separate from the core of the mitzvah, ve'enam elam mishum syog v'goder, and they're only made as a fence and a border, a parameter to protect the Torah. These things, these rabbinic enactments are not included in the prohibition of don't add to the Torah. But just the opposite. From the fact that the Torah first told us don't add to it, and then said velo sigra mimenu, and don't take away from it, don't subtract from the mitzvos, from the commandments. Shma mino, we learn from this, shahakosav mazhirenu, that the Torah is warning us, Shena said, that we should make additions be'inyan shelo yavo'u, in such a way that people do not, shelo yavo'u b'nei adam, that people do not come ligroa mimenu, to subtract from the Torah. Dahainu, that this means as follows. In other words, this is how we should understand the psukim of don't add and don't subtract. Lo sosif alav, that's the first part of the pasuk. Don't add to any mitzvahs in the Torah. Avol ata yochol lohosif, but you are able to add to the mitzvahs in the Torah, heicha de'ika lemechash, where there is reason to be concerned, sheyavo'u lidei baltigra, that a person might come, that people might come to subtract from the Torah. So that's the way the Zera Shimshon tells us we need to understand the psukim. And the Torah specifically put them in the order it did to teach us don't add to the Torah, and then don't subtract from the Torah, to show the connection is that we should understand we should never add to a core of a mitzvah no matter what. And we shouldn't add any elements to a mitzvah unless it's to help with the next mitzvah of lo tigra mimenu. Don't take away from the Torah. And that's what the Chachamim did. That's the whole point. They added enactments to the Torah prohibitions of Shabbos in order to make sure that people didn't start taking away, meaning start violating the prohibitions on Shabbos. That's what they did. The ilav hachi, because if it was not the Torah's intention to teach us that, it could have written lo sigra mimenu velo sosef alav. It could have reversed the order and said, don't subtract from it and don't add to it. in which case we would have received both mitzvos, both ideas of don't subtract from the Torah and don't add to the Torah, but we would not have received the idea that the Zera Shimshon is teaching us, which is how the two things can work together if lo sosif is first. Don't add to the Torah and don't subtract, meaning don't add to the Torah unless you need to add to the Torah certain enactments to make sure that people don't end up subtracting from the Torah. And that's the justification, or I should say the explanation as to why the Chachamim made their Torah enactments and were not afraid to do so, or did not withhold from doing so, based on the pasuk of "Don't add to the Torah," because that's not considered adding to the Torah. On the contrary, that's protecting the laws of the Torah by making their additional rules, which we have learned in this piece have a Torah. A pasuk that tells us to listen to those enactments and pronouncements of the rabbi of the Chachamim who are protecting the Torah, the laws of Shabbos specifically. Next paragraph. All of this that we explain makes sense if we're talking about people, sheyesh lahem yetzer hara, who have an evil inclination. When you're dealing with people who have a yetzer hara, then you need to be concerned about things like subtracting from the Torah and taking away mitzvos and violating Torah laws because they have a yetzer hara. Umnam hamalachim, however, the malachim, she'efshar lahem lavo lidei bal tigra. It's impossible for them by their very nature to come to want to detract and take away, to subtract mitzvos from the Torah. A malach, it would never occur to a malach who is completely devoid of a yetzer hara. It would never occur to the malach to think, hey, let me not do everything that it says in the Torah. Let me take away mitzvos in the Torah. Pshita she'ein lahem lahosif, and therefore it's obvious that if they have no inclination whatsoever to subtract from the Torah, and that could never happen, it's obvious that they're not allowed to add to the Torah. The im kain, and if so, im hoya hakadosh baruch hu omer, if Hashem had said li Yisrael to the Jewish people, mitzvah zo, this mitzvah of following the additional rabbinic prohibitions on Shabbos, al yedei malach, if Hashem had in fact sent that message to Bnei Yisrael through a malach, lo hayisi yochol lefaresh, I would not have been able to explain the pasuk, ach es shabsosai, only keep my Shabbases afilu b'devarim shehem mishum shvus, even with things that are only forbidden by the Chachamim. I would not have been able to learn the pasuk that way, to interpret the pasuk that way, if it had been transmitted through a malach, shehem devar tosefes, because then it would be viewed as an additional thing. Hoil shahamalach hamitzuvah osanu b'mitzvah zo, since the malach who commanded us this mitzvah or transmitted this mitzvah to us, einom be'oso advorim shel tosefes. They're not included in the issue of adding to the Torah, meaning only human beings, and in this case we're talking specifically about Moshe Rabbeinu, only Moshe Rabbeinu could give Bnei Yisrael the mitzvah of ach es shabsosai tishmoru. He could only say those words with the intention, which was Hashem's intention, of telling Bnei Yisrael, don't violate Shabbos even with rabbinically forbidden actions. Don't do that. Well, Moshe can successfully convey that message, but a malach cannot convey that message because a malach is not part of the whole equation of Bal Tosif and Bal Tigra, of not adding to the Torah and not subtracting from the Torah, in the way that the Zera Shimshon explained how those two psukim are meant to operate. Specifically, don't add to the Torah unless you're making additions, unless you're the Chachamim making additions to prevent people from subtracting from the Torah. That whole idea, that whole concept doesn't work with a malach, because a malach has no yetzer hara, which would ever lead it to add or subtract from the Torah. Next paragraph. if a malach conveyed this mitzvah, we would have thought that the malach was conveying the mitzvah based on its understanding or its relationship to the Torah. V'lo kafi haTorah sheyesh lanu lasos mishmeres lemishmeres, and not according to the Torah the way we understand it, in which the Chachamim were commanded to make a guardrail or make a protection of the things that Hashem once protected. We wouldn't understand it that way. Dumya lemai de amrinan, and this is similar to what Chazal say in a Gemara in Maseches Gittin. Sheha'eved eino yochol liyo shaliach, an eved, meaning a non-Jewish servant, an eved Kanani, to use that category or description, is not able to serve as a shaliach, as a messenger, begittin v'kiddushin, regarding the delivery of a get, or regarding the delivery of things need to betroth a woman. That's kiddushin. You can't use an eved to do that. So even though in the days when people owned avodim and they had these non-Jewish servants, even though it became very customary for them to use them to carry out all kinds of tasks, you weren't allowed to tell your eved to bring a ring to a woman, for example, and say, I'm bringing this ring on behalf of my master in order because he wants to marry you, he wants to betroth you, or I'm bringing you a document of divorce, he would say to the woman, because my master told me to bring this document of divorce to you. An Eved Kanani cannot do that. Why not? Lefisha eno bichlal gittin v'kiddushin, because he's not included at all in the categories of gittin v'kiddushin. The laws and the whole sections of laws that have to do with marriage and divorce don't apply to an Eved Kanani. He's completely outside of that entire area of Jewish law, and therefore he can't participate even as a shaliach of a Jewish man. Similarly, what the Zera Shimshon is, he brings that example to say that's similar to a malach who, if he brought this mitzvah about Shabbos and prohibiting things rabbinically, would not be included at all in that section of the Torah of adding and subtracting, and therefore it wouldn't work. And therefore, Hayinu Omrim, we would have said, Shebinyan HaMishkan veHaMikdash, that the building of the Mishkan and later the Beis HaMikdash, Yiyedoche, could override or could push aside Hadivarim Shehem Mishum Shvus, things that are prohibited on Shabbos rabbinically. We would have thought that. If we don't have the correct understanding of the mitzvah in this week's Parsha of Aches Shabsosai Tishmoru, which in the correct understanding means that the Torah itself is telling us to follow and preserve the rabbinic enactments that were made to protect Shabbos, if we don't have that understanding, then we would think when it comes time for the building of the Mishkan, we understand that we don't do anything that would violate Torah law, but we would think we could do and even should do in order to build the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash, things that are only rabbinically forbidden. And that would lead us to make a major mistake because that is not in fact the case. The actual halacha is that on Shabbos, even if you were involved in building the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash, you were prohibited from doing both things that were forbidden by the Torah and things that were forbidden by the Chachamim. You were not allowed to do, even on Shabbos, even for the purpose of building the Mishkan or Beis HaMikdash. Next, last paragraph. Mishum hachi amar hakosov, because of this, the pasuk said, Ve'ata daber, you Moshe, you specifically have to transmit and communicate this pasuk of Es Shabsosai Tishmoru, Sha'oz Yavinu, because then the people will understand Sha'afilu Hatzvarim Shel Shvus, even things which are rabbinically forbidden on Shabbos, Ein Binyan Beis HaMikdash Doche Osam. Even the building of the Beis HaMikdash does not push them aside, and they cannot be done on Shabbos, even for the purpose of that building. V'lo Ratza Lomar Lohem Beferish, and Hashem did not wish to specifically say these rabbinic prohibitions explicitly in the Torah, Lefisha Rotze Shedin Hashvus, because he wanted the law of this law that we're learning about following the rabbinic takonos, the rabbinic enactments, Yihiyeh dafka mid'Rabbanan, it should be specifically rabbinic, velo mid'oraisa, and not from Torah law. Meaning that even though the Zera Shimshon went to great pains and took great pains and went to great lengths to show us that it's learned from a pasuk that these things, these rabbinic enactments should be followed on Shabbos, nonetheless, they still maintain, even though they're connected to that pasuk, they still maintain the level of rabbinic law and not Torah law. And that is according to other meforshim, that's referred to as esmachta, where rabbinic enactments are connected to a pasuk in the Torah, but the rabbinic enactments still remain on the level of rabbinic law and not deoraisa, not Torah law. So the Zera Shimshon has taken a little excerpt from the Yalkut Shimoni and gone on a deep dive into ideas of rabbinic laws on Shabbos and why they were made and why we need to follow them, and how all of that stems from the pasuk in our Parsha Ki Tisa, Achesh Sosai Tishmoru. And certainly we know a lot more about the entire subject than we did before we started the piece. Yasher Koch to joining us this week in the Zera Shimshon. We look forward, God willing, to learning Zera Shimshon together again next week.